Well, good morning and welcome to another episode here out under a gorgeous Australian spring day. And today I want to show you a subject that I shot a little while ago now. And if you look over my right shoulder down there in the paddock, you'll see this gorgeous little stone hut. We're going to go there today. Okay, now the first battle I had to negotiate when entering this property, by the way, I made a phone call last night and I asked Brad, the owner of this property, if it was okay to come over and do some work here today. No worries at all. And like I've said to you in the past, I always try to do that, to do the right thing. And so they know I'm here. But anyway, first thing I have to negotiate is this electric fence. I don't know if you can see it under me here. I had to find somewhere where I can get across the outside fence, and this tree is perfect, so I'm just jumping over that now. He's got a lot of cattle on this property, and the last thing I want to do is be bitten by an electric fence, because it's happened to me before and I know what it feels like. Now, speaking of interesting stories, there is one that comes from the last time I was here. Now, once again, I rang the owner of the property and said, I'm coming here during that night to shoot some nightscapes down on the creek, just down here. And he said, yeah, no worries at all. Just come along, no problem. Anyway, so I arrived on the road, parked my car over there like I have today, just got to the front fence there. I'd got my gear out and I was just about ready to jump over, and suddenly, bang, there's this enormous shotgun blast from way over there on the farm. Now, I knew it was a fair way away, but I thought, oh, I hope nobody's shooting on the property tonight. Anyway, about 30 seconds later, a car comes flying down the road and stops behind my car on the road. And I thought, what is going on here? Left his headlights on, so I sheepishly got back onto the road with all my gear and everything, which I had with me. And I said, he said, g'day mate, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm here to take photos. And then he said, oh, that's right, I remember you were coming now. He'd actually rung his friend down there to shoot a shot into the sky to scare off some hunters or rustlers or whatever they thought I was. And he'd completely forgotten that he said it was okay for me to come here and shoot. So it was a bit funny, but in the end I gave him a calendar which I had in my car, introduced myself because I'd never actually met him. I'd only ever spoken to him on the phone, and everything was fine from then on. And it was really funny because the other day when I spoke to him on the phone, I said, I remember that time, and he said, yeah, I tell everybody about that story. So we've both got a story to tell. It's funny. All right, well, I'm just about to face my first challenge of the day. Well, it's probably not my first challenge. I had to get across that electric fence, but now I've got to work out how to cross over this creek here. As you can see, it's a fair bit of water. Now, I remember having this problem last time I was here, and I found a spot just over here, so I'm going to go and have a look. And I think I might have got my feet wet last time, but there hasn't been very much rain here, so I'm hoping I can get away with it. Anyway, let's have a look. All right, well, we made it across the creek okay, so I'm pretty thankful about that. I can't wait to show you this ruin up here. It is so delightful. It is so beautiful. But there's one thing I want to show you on the way, because when I was going to this place the first time, I noticed something else and I happened to shoot that. So that's our first stop. Let's go. Now, what I want you to do is have a look at this tree, this beautiful gum tree in the background. As I was walking up to my location to shoot, I happened to notice this tree. Now, when I was here, it was this time of year, so it was October, and the Milky Way core was stretching out in the western sky right across like a bow in the sky. It absolutely looks beautiful here in the southern hemisphere. and it just so happens that it was going straight over the top of this tree. So I decided to shoot a panorama and put the tree right in the middle of the frame. So what I did, I got my Nikon D750 with the 20mm f1.8 lens just over there. So centered the tree, and I decided to shoot a 14 shot panorama. So 2 rows of 7. So 7 across the bottom, 7 across the top. And my settings were f2.8, ISO 2500, and I shot for 15-second shutter speed. And I was wrapped in how that one looked. The other thing I did was place a video light underneath the tree just to give it a little bit of backlight. Here we are just at the bottom of the tree, and what I did, I used my Z96 video light. You can see it here, which I use quite a lot for most of these low level lighting, architectural lighting. So for this particular shot with the panorama, this was on for the full duration of each of those 14 exposures. It was on a really low level, hence the name low level light. With the orange gel, you can see the orange gel that comes off, that was on for the whole time, just to warm up the image a bit. And I placed it behind the tree because I wanted a glow from the back and up. And you know that I never light anything from directly in front. And this always looks better when you do it that way. Now, as far as lighting at the front of the tree goes, I use my trusty torch, my LED Lenser P7.2. Now, every single one of those 14 shots that I took that night, I lit the foreground. Sometimes it was just sky and I didn't need any lighting, but I did anyway just in case, and especially just to get a touch of light on the front of the tree. I didn't really light the front of the tree much, but there was a little bit, and certainly on the grass here. I wanted to make sure the foreground shone out. Now, I have another reason for doing that, because what I've found is with panoramas, sometimes they have trouble stitching when there's not enough light on the foreground. And I've learnt my lesson. If I just leave the foreground black, sometimes the software struggles to find the joining points. But in the end, I was wrapped with the image I got. Well, just have a look at this absolute ripper of a subject matter. Now, I knew when I first saw this from the road, and by the way, the question is, how did I find this? Well, what I did, I drove around in my car up this road one day, quite a while ago now, and I saw out of the corner of my eye this little stone structure in the paddock. It's a fair way off the road. It's a fair walk to get over here. And so there it is, and what a fantastic place this is. It's gorgeous countryside, little creek running right alongside here. As you can see, I keep having to cross it over, but the stone structure. Now, it's still standing after all of these years, and I was going to spend many hours shooting various angles of this. So I'm going to show you how I did that and the images I shot right now. Well, it looks like I've got a bit of competition up there. There's cockatoos everywhere out here, and I think they're announcing that I've arrived. But anyway, this is my first composition. Now you can see what I'm doing here. I've got the camera nice and low down here. That is facing in a southwesterly direction. As I said to you before, the Milky Way core is stretching along in that sky overhead. So what I did, I placed my camera right here. Something a little bit different for this particular shot. I decided to leave that 20mm f1.8 lens wide open at f1.8 to shoot one background shot of the night sky. Now, to compensate a little bit for that wide open aperture, I dropped the shutter speed to 10 seconds and I put my ISO onto 2500. Now, for that first shot, you can see a tree over there in the background. What I did, I put my Z96 video light underneath the tree, the same as I did for the other tree up the hill there, just to give it a backlight and a bit of a silhouette in the sky. I could have just left it black, but I wanted to give it just a little bit of a highlight. Then, what I did, I came along to the hut here and stopped down my aperture to f4, lengthened my exposure time to 20 seconds, and left my, I dropped my ISO to 640. And then I shot the hut here, 6 exposures. And by the way, I refocused, made sure my focus was sharp on the hut. That's critical to do. And then I light painted areas around the hut from the left-hand side to the right-hand side and blended all of those images together, firstly in Lightroom, then in Photoshop, and I was absolutely delighted with the end result. All right, well, you know, I've been out here for a while and I think it's time I had something to eat. I've got these gorgeous ham and pickle sandwich. That'll keep me going for a little while, I reckon. Nice water bottle. Ah, gee, you can't beat it. It's just fantastic out here. I'm being surrounded by bees in this tree. But, you know, it's springtime. That's what we get. Now, one of the things that I try to do whenever I go out shooting nightscapes is to try something a little bit different. And in this case, I decided to change my lens. Now, I was going to shoot exactly the same composition, or pretty much exactly, but I fitted my 35mm f1.4. Now, when that happens, obviously things change. So firstly, I had to get further back down the hill. So I was back down, well, obviously further away from the subject because I wanted the composition to be roughly the same as what I had before. So I got further down this hill and focused on the background night sky. Now you can see over here, when I come around this way, you can see that there'll be less of the sky in the frame at 35mm than there is at 20mm. I mean, that just makes sense. That's just optics. So I suppose I just had to frame it as best I could. I still wanted to get the tree and I certainly wanted to get all of the hut. So I knew I was going to compromise on the sky. But the good thing about it was that the sky, the Milky Way, was quite low in the western horizon there. So that gave me plenty of space. Even with it low, I still had space above the core. And of course, when you shoot with a 35mm lens, it compresses the background and brings it nice and close. And I absolutely love that. So with the 35mm lens, what settings did I choose to use? All right. So firstly, because it's 35mm, I've got to lower my shutter speed. So I went to 10 seconds. I shot one image for the sky at f2.2, 10-second shutter speed, ISO 2500. Then I shot 6 foreground images, very similar to what I did before. I set my aperture to f3.5. That's a little bit different, but I wanted to try, as I said, a few different settings just to get a feel for what it looks like. But I lowered my ISO down to 650. So lower ISO, a little bit closed down aperture, short shutter speed. Then I took 6 images, exactly the same as what I did before, light painting around the different angles of the foreground, including the grass and the ground here. And once again, that image has its own dynamics and I absolutely love it. Now, one of the things I like to do when I'm at a location such as this is maximize the time that I have here and also incorporate as many different types of shots as possible. So, whilst I was here, I decided to shoot star trails as well. And to do that, I moved my camera across to this side of the creek, facing more in a southerly direction so I get those circumpolar star trails behind the hut. Now, I only had the 20mm and the 35mm lens, so I decided I'd shoot with a 20mm focal length on this. Now, that's not quite as wide as a lot of people shoot star trails, often at 14 or 16mm, but even so, it gives me a good perspective. So what I did, I set the camera up over here, fairly low down to the ground. Now, you'll know that I often talk about being low to the ground to get my shots, and the reason for that is that it maximizes my foreground subject the lower my tripod is. Also, it gives me more background sky in my shot, and that works well with the 20mm focal length. So from there, what we did, I set my aperture to f2.8 and my shutter speed to bulb, and I used an external intervalometer to get a 3-minute exposure time. I put my ISO to 640, so because of the long exposure time, I needed my ISO to be fairly low. And then I shot 10 shots with no light painting at all. So in other words, I got 10 shots, total of 30-minute shutter speed, with the foreground in complete darkness. And I then stopped down my aperture to f4, changed my shutter speed to 20 seconds, but I left my ISO at 640. Now, the reason I'm doing all of this is to shoot the foreground, because my intention is to blend the foreground in to the background shots. So it's critical that foreground in when I shot the star trails remains dark. It's a lot easier to blend that way. Then the other thing I did, which is pretty critical, is to make sure my focus is sharp on the foreground. And I always do that. Every time I talk about blending images, background and foreground, etc. When I'm shooting a background sky, I make sure I'm focused on infinity because I want the stars to be sharp. But when I'm focusing on a foreground area, I want to make sure that the focus is sharp on the foreground. That makes sense, doesn't it? So that's what I did. The other thing I had was this beautiful little creek here, which you can just see a bit of, which is, I guess, acts as a bit of a leading line into the image, and I particularly like that composition. So then I lit only 4 shots, 2 from that side, 2 from this side, to give it a little bit of dynamic. Remember, never lighting from the same position as the camera, always lighting off camera. And you know what? With these bricks and stonework, it makes all the difference because it shows the texture in those mortar lines. And the old sheet iron roof there, it looks fantastic when you light it from the sides. And I was absolutely wrapped with that image. Okay, now talking once again about maximizing my opportunities. This is a time-lapse slider, and yes, I did a time lapse while I was here shooting this beautiful hut with the Milky Way core setting down into the western sky. Now, one little disclaimer, you're probably thinking, how on earth can you do all of that in the same place? I came back another night to shoot the time lapse because you're right, I can't shoot all of those other shots without getting myself in the way of all of these things that are happening. But nevertheless, I want to show you my time lapse slider and how I went about shooting the time lapse. So this time lapse slider is one of the most basic pieces of equipment you would ever find. Now, a lot of you are going to ask me, does that shoot, move, shoot? And the answer is no. All it does is a consistent slow move from one side to the other. So I did some experimenting with this, and I found that if you set the speed low enough, even with a 15 or 20 second shutter speed, it's negligible. It doesn't blur at all. So the time lapse that I shot here at this location, I used this device set up on these little ball head, tiny little tripods, just to get it enough off the ground to be able to be steady and sturdy. I wanted it to be down low because I want to get that view up into the subject. And so these little ball heads, I can just adjust them like so and level the slider. So all you do is you put the batteries in, you set the direction you want it to go, so starting at one end, going all the way to the other, set it to a very low speed, put your camera on, stick the intervalometer on to create the time lapse. Now I took about 400 images here. My settings were f2.8. I had the Nikon D750 14 to 24 f2.8 lens set to 14 millimeters, so I can get a very wide angle, lots of sky and lots of ground, which is what I wanted. And I had a constant light. Now you're going to ask me about the lighting. I had a Z96 video light set over there on a light stand out of the shot, and a very, very low level, and another one just over here, again off camera. So that's giving a very dull light onto the foreground. Now because I was shooting with a 14mm lens, I was far enough away, I'm probably about 15 meters from the hut, far enough for that to be in focus. If you look at the depth of field chart at 14mm, 15 meters away is certainly past the infinity focus point. So anyway, everything looks nice and sharp and focused. And all I did then was press go on the intervalometer, press go on the slider, and it gradually made its way all across from one side to the other, and this is the result. Now, for anyone who may be interested, I actually have two of these sliders, and so one's for sale. If anyone wants to contact me, probably people in Australia would be easier. These are actually locally made by a guy in Melbourne, and for what they do a pretty good job. They're basic and simple, and you know, that's not a bad thing. I've got a few other sliders which I use, which are much more complex than this. This doesn't have any remote controls or anything. The other ones do, much harder to set up. This one just seems to work pretty well. Well, this is absolutely fantastic. And you know, out of all of the places that I shoot, this is right up there to being one of my favorites. I mean, it's just such an awesome location, a beautiful building, and I think the results speak for themselves. So thanks again so much for joining me here at this beautiful property. And I'm really pleased to be able to present things like this to you. I'm fully aware that where you live, you might not have access to these sorts of buildings out in a dark location like this. I'm probably 120, 130 kilometres from the largest city light source, so it's pretty dark here. So anyway, look forward to seeing you next time out under the stars on a Nightscape Images adventure, and until then, I'll see you then.